Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information presented in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or psychological professional advice. Divorce laws, asset division, and custody regulations vary significantly by state and are subject to change. This content should not be used as a substitute for the counsel of a licensed attorney or a qualified professional in your jurisdiction. Always conduct your own due diligence and consult with the professional regarding your specific situation. The American family unit is currently undergoing a tectonic shift that most men are completely unprepared for. For decades, the narrative surrounding divorce was predictable: a midlife crisis, a clean break, and a standard division of assets. But in 2026, the data tells a much more complex and, for many men, a much more jarring story. While overall divorce rates in the United States have seen a statistical decline from their peak in the 1980s, that broad number hides a much more volatile reality. Specifically, we are seeing a massive surge in gray divorce among men over 50, a radical shift in how no-fault laws are being applied in high-net-worth cases, and a brand new phenomenon where men are increasingly the ones seeking alimony in a shifting labor market. If you believe the divorce process today looks anything like it did for your father or your grandfather, you are operating on an outdated map. We are entering an era where the legal and social systems are lagging behind the new economic reality of the American household. And if you don't understand these changing demographics, you risk losing not just your wealth, but your identity and your future stability. This video is the definitive masterclass on navigating the modern landscape of divorce in America. Today, we are breaking down the specific demographic shifts that are redefining what it means to untie the knot in the 21st century. We will explore why the traditional alimony models are breaking down, how the rise of the female breadwinner is changing custody battles, and the specific psychological hurdles men face when the statistics they thought they knew suddenly flip. This is about more than just legal survival. It is about understanding the historical trends and potential outcomes so you can make informed, rational decisions in one of life's most chaotic moments. To understand where we are going, we have to look at the breakdown of the silver splitters. One of the most significant demographic changes in recent years is the explosion of divorce among the baby boomer and Gen X populations. According to historical trends observed by census data and sociological research, the divorce rate for U.S. adults aged 50 and older has roughly doubled since the 1990s. For those over 65, the rate has tripled. This is a demographic that often spent 30 years building a retirement nest egg, paying off a mortgage, and establishing a specific standard of living. When a marriage dissolves at 55 or 60, the mathematical reality is brutal. Unlike a 30-year-old who has decades of career growth ahead of them to recover financially, a man in his late 50s is often entering his peak earning years or looking toward a fixed income. Consider the case study of a typical corporate executive who has spent 3 decades contributing to a 401k and building equity in a suburban home. In the 1990s, the social expectation was often to stick it out for the sake of the adult children or social standing. Today, the demographic shift toward individual fulfillment means that long-term marriages are no longer seen as permanent. When that executive hits the divorce court today, he isn't just splitting a bank account. He is often splitting a pension that was intended to support 2 people in one household, which must now support 2 separate households with double the utility bills, double the property taxes, and double the insurance premiums. The math simply does not scale linearly. This shift requires a total reassessment of retirement planning and a deep dive into the specific state laws regarding Qualified Domestic Relations Orders, or QDROs, which govern how those retirement funds are actually sliced up. Furthermore, we must address the breadwinner reversal. For the first time in American history, nearly 40% of wives out-earn their husbands or are the sole providers. This is a massive demographic pivot from the era when alimony, or spousal support, was almost exclusively a male-to-female transfer of wealth. In modern courtrooms, we are seeing a rise in cases where men are eligible for spousal support, yet many men fail to claim it due to outdated social stigmas or a lack of understanding of the current legal frameworks. However, the flip side of this is equally complex. In high-earning households where both partners have significant careers, the standard of living calculations used by courts to determine support have become incredibly intricate. It is no longer a simple calculation of he earns X, she earns Y. Courts are now looking at earning capacity, which means even if you or your spouse aren't currently working, the court might impute an income based on your education and work history. Step by step, The modern man needs to look at his household through the lens of a forensic accountant. You have to categorize assets not just by who paid for them, but by their characterization as community or separate property. In states like California or Texas, the rules are rigid, but the demographic trend toward later-in-life marriages means that many men are entering marriages with significant pre-existing assets. The commingling of these assets, such as using an inheritance to pay down a joint mortgage, is a demographic trap that is catching more men than ever before. We also have to discuss the changing face of fatherhood. The demographic data suggests that more men are seeking and receiving equal physical custody than at any point in the last 50 years. The tender years doctrine, which historically favored mothers for custody of young children, has been largely replaced by the best interests of the child standard. This sounds like a win for fathers, and in many ways it is, but it brings a new set of logistical and financial challenges. Shared custody often means that child support calculations are significantly altered. In some jurisdictions, if you have the children 50% of the time, the child support obligation can be drastically reduced or even eliminated depending on the income disparity. This creates a high-stakes environment where custody battles are no longer just about parenting time. They are inextricably linked to monthly cash flow. The complexity increases when we look at the digital asset demographic. 10 years ago, a divorce involved a house, a car, and a bank account. Today, we are dealing with a demographic of men whose wealth is tied up in cryptocurrency, stock options, RSUs, and even digital intellectual property. The legal system is often 5 years behind the technology. Tracking these assets and ensuring they are valued correctly at the time of separation versus the time of trial can result in differences of hundreds of thousands of dollars. This masterclass is designed to pull back the curtain on these shifts. We aren't here to give you a strategy to beat the system. We are here to provide the educational foundation so you understand the environment you are walking into. The demographics of divorce are shifting from a predictable legal procedure to a complex socio-economic negotiation. By the end of this deep dive, you will understand the historical trends that have led to this point, the specific ways modern laws are being applied to different age groups, and how the evolution of the American workforce is fundamentally changing the financial obligations of men in the 2020s. We are looking at the potential outcomes of these shifts so that you can navigate this transition with your eyes wide open, grounded in data rather than emotion. This is about the reality of the 21st century American male experience, and it starts with acknowledging that the old rules no longer apply. To understand the gravity of these shifting rules, we have to look at the economic cornerstone of most American households, the primary residence. In 2026, the housing market has created a demographic trap that is fundamentally different from anything we saw 10 years ago. Imagine a man named David, a 45-year-old software engineer living in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. David and his spouse bought their home in 2017 for $400,000. By 2026, that home is valued at $850,000. Under historical trends, the standard move was for one spouse to buy out the other or for the house to be sold and the equity split. But David is facing a 2026 reality where his current mortgage rate is 3%, while the prevailing market rates for a new loan are significantly higher. If David tries to buy out his spouse, he has to refinance the entire $850,000 valuation at the current higher rate. His monthly payment would effectively triple. This creates a phenomenon we are now calling the divorce lock-in. Data suggests that many men are finding themselves in a position where they literally cannot afford to leave the marriage because the cost of establishing a secondary, equivalent household is mathematically impossible under current credit conditions. This is a demographic shift where the financial barrier to entry for a new life has become a mountain rather than a hurdle. In David's case, he is looking at a potential outcome where 60% of his post-divorce take-home pay would go toward a smaller apartment than the house he currently shares. When we talk about depth in this masterclass, we have to look at the step-by-step breakdown of how equity is actually calculated in these high-inflation environments. It is no longer just about the appraisal, it is about the cost of capital. Men in 2026 are increasingly forced to consider unconventional arrangements, such as nesting, where the children stay in the home and the parents rotate in and out, simply because the demographic reality of the U.S. housing market has made the traditional two-home split a path to rapid wealth depletion. Beyond the physical walls of the home, we have to examine the demographic shift in how professional degrees and career trajectories are treated in court. Historical trends once viewed a husband's career growth as his own, provided he paid a set amount of support. However, in 2026, there is an increasing move toward viewing human capital as a marital asset. Imagine Michael, who spent the last 8 years working his way up to a senior VP role at a logistics firm in Chicago, while his wife managed the household. In many modern jurisdictions, the court may look at the enhanced earning capacity Michael acquired during the marriage as something his spouse is entitled to a portion of. This is not just about the money in the bank today. It is about a claim on Michael's future labor. This demographic trend is especially prevalent in states that follow community property principles or aggressive equitable distribution statutes. To provide a step-by-step detail on this, consider how forensic vocational experts are now used. These professionals are hired to determine what a man's degree or professional license is worth over the course of a lifetime. They use historical data to project earnings, and then discount that back to a present value. For a man in a high-growth field like AI development or specialized medicine, this present value calculation can be staggering. It means a man might enter a divorce in 2026 and find that his most valuable asset isn't his house or his stocks, but his own brain and future work ethic, and that asset is being appraised and divided before he has even earned the money. This creates a massive psychological and financial burden, essentially placing a lien on his future before he has even begun his next chapter. We also need to look at the demographic of the invisible asset. In 2026, the average American man has a digital footprint that is often worth more than his physical property. Case studies from recent years show a rise in disputes over frequent flyer miles, credit card points, and even social media handles with significant followings. For a man who has built a side business or a personal brand during his marriage, that brand is now on the table. If you have spent 5 years building a YouTube channel or a consulting practice on the side, the demographic trend in 2026 is for the court to treat that as a business with a valuation, even if it hasn't reached its full potential yet. This leads to the step-by-step necessity of a digital audit. Men are now being advised to track every digital subscription, every loyalty program, and every automated investment account. The failure to disclose a seemingly small digital asset like a cryptocurrency wallet from 2018 can lead to accusations of asset hiding, which carries severe legal and financial penalties in every U.S. state. This leads us to the demographic shift in the male social support system. Historically, men have been more likely to experience social isolation following a divorce compared to women, who often have more robust communicative networks. In 2026, this is exacerbated by the digital nature of our social lives. When a marriage ends, the digital social circles often split along hard lines. We see a trend where men lose access to shared friend groups and even community organizations that were centered around the family unit. This social demographic shift has a direct impact on a man's ability to maintain his career performance and his physical health. Case studies show that men who do not proactively build a new, independent social infrastructure during the divorce process are significantly more likely to see a decline in their professional earning capacity within the first 24 months. This is a critical point of value. Your financial survival in a 2026 divorce is tied directly to your psychological resilience. You cannot navigate a complex asset division if you are operating from a place of total social depletion. The data also points to a new demographic of men, the reevaluators. These are men who, seeing the potential outcomes of the current legal landscape, are opting for alternative dispute resolutions like collaborative divorce or mediation in record numbers. The historical trend of the scorched earth litigation style is becoming a demographic outlier because the costs have simply become too high. In 2026, the average contested divorce in the United States can easily cost between $50,000 and $100,000 in legal fees alone. For a middle-class man, that is his entire liquid net worth. The move toward mediation isn't just a trend, it's a financial survival mechanism. It allows for a step-by-step negotiation that keeps the decision-making power in the hands of the individuals, rather than a judge who has 15 minutes to review a file. However, even in mediation, the demographic shift in alimony remains a primary point of contention. We are seeing a move toward rehabilitative alimony rather than permanent alimony. This is the idea that support is paid for a specific period, perhaps 3 to 5 years, to allow the lower-earning spouse to get back on their feet. But there is a catch that most men miss. In 2026, the tax laws surrounding alimony have remained in a post-2018 state, meaning alimony is no longer tax-deductible for the payer. This was a massive demographic shift that fundamentally changed the math of divorce. If you are paying $2,000 a month in support, you are paying that in after-tax dollars. To give someone $2,000, you might have to earn $3,000. This creates a silent tax on divorced men that many don't realize until their first tax season as a single person. As we go deeper into this deep dive, we have to confront the most sensitive demographic shift of all: the intersection of the legal system and the modern healthcare landscape. This involves how health insurance, life insurance, and even long-term disability plans are being leveraged as bargaining chips in the 2026 divorce arena. If you think the battle ends with the house and the kids, you are missing the most volatile component of the modern split. But what happens when the very things you use to protect your future become the weapons used to anchor you to your past? And how does the rise of a specific, new type of forensic evidence, data from your own wearable devices and smart home technology, completely change the way conduct is viewed in the courtroom? We are just scratching the surface of the technological demographic shift that is about to redefine your privacy and your pocketbook. The intersection of technology and the legal system in 2026 has created a demographic of transparency that didn't exist even 5 years ago. We are now seeing the emergence of the quantified divorce. This is a shift where the subjective he said, she said arguments of the past are being decimated by objective data harvested from the very devices we use to manage our lives. Imagine a man named Robert in Seattle. Robert is in the middle of a high-stakes custody battle. He claims to be a present, active father who is home every night by 6 p.m. to help with homework. However, the demographic trend in 2026 legal discovery now includes subpoenas for smart home hub logs and wearable fitness tracker data. In Robert's case, his spouse's legal team doesn't need to hire a private investigator to sit outside his house. They simply request the data from his smart thermostat and his front door's smart lock. If the thermostat indicates the heat is lowered to away mode until 9 p.m. every night, and the smart lock logs show his unique biometric entry code isn't being used until the late evening, his testimony is effectively neutralized. This is a step-by-step reality of how digital footprints are being used to establish patterns of behavior. It isn't just about big secrets. It is about the mundane data points that contradict a narrative. Historical trends show that men often overlook these passive data collectors. Your smartwatch, your car's GPS history, and even your connected refrigerator are now potential witnesses in a courtroom. Step by step, men need to understand the concept of digital spoliation. In 2026, the moment a divorce is filed, or even when it is reasonably anticipated, a litigation hold effectively goes into place. If you decide to delete your search history, clear your location data, or wipe a hard drive because you value your privacy, a judge may view that as the destruction of evidence. The potential outcome here is a negative inference, where the court assumes whatever you deleted was damaging to your case. This demographic of high-tech surveillance means that for the modern American man, the private life has virtually vanished. You have to operate under the assumption that every text, every deleted photo, and every late-night Google search is recoverable and potentially viewable by a magistrate. This leads us into the demographic shift regarding the gig economy and hidden income. In 2026, many men have diversified their income streams. You might have a corporate job, but you also flip items on digital marketplaces, drive for a premium rideshare service, or rent out a property on a short-term basis. Historical trends in divorce focused on the W-2 tax form. In 2026, forensic accountants are diving into Venmo, Cash App, and PayPal histories. Imagine if Jason, a father of 2 in Florida, has been funneling his side hustle earnings into a digital wallet to save for a post-divorce safety net. In the 2026 demographic of forensic finance, these apps are no longer off the books. Case studies show that courts are increasingly savvy about lifestyle analysis. If your reported income is $80,000, but your digital spending and social media posts show a $120,000 lifestyle, the court will bridge that gap by imputing income to you, regardless of whether they can find the specific account. Now let's pivot to the demographic of health and insurance, a topic that is becoming a massive financial anchor for men. Historically, one spouse could stay on the other's employer-provided health insurance plan until the divorce was finalized. In 2026, with the rising costs of corporate premiums and the shift toward high-deductible plans, we are seeing Cobra shock. When a man is the primary policyholder, he is often shocked to find that removing a spouse doesn't necessarily lower his premium significantly, but the cost for the spouse to get an independent plan is often factored into the alimony or maintenance calculation. Consider the case study of Mark in Ohio. Mark is 52 and has a stable job with great benefits. During the divorce negotiations, his spouse's attorney argues that because she has been out of the workforce and has a pre-existing condition, Mark must pay an additional $1,200 a month specifically to cover her new private insurance premiums. This is a demographic trend where healthcare is being treated as a mandatory, standard of living requirement. For many men, this becomes a permanent or long-term transfer of wealth that isn't labeled as alimony, but has the exact same impact on their monthly budget. You have to look at the step-by-step cost of unbundling a life. It is not just the Netflix password. It is the group life insurance, the umbrella liability policy, and the family cell phone plan. Each of these small digital and financial tethers represents a demographic shift where the cost of being single is exponentially higher than the cost of being married. We also have to address the demographic of the relocation trap. In 2026, the U.S. workforce is more mobile than ever. Remote work has allowed men to live anywhere. However, if you are a father, your mobility is often legally chained to the jurisdiction where your children reside. We are seeing a rise in geographic restriction clauses. Imagine if Kevin gets a dream job offer in a different state that pays 50% more. In a 2026 divorce decree, he might be prohibited from moving more than 50 miles from his ex-spouse without her written consent or a court order. If he moves, he loses his custody percentage. This creates a demographic of men who are career stagnant because they cannot move to follow the market. The historical trend was that the breadwinner moved and the family followed. The 2026 reality is that the children's location dictates the man's career path. This career stagnation has a ripple effect on the demographic of men's mental wealth. We are seeing a case study trend where the pressure of maintaining a high-income status quo to meet support obligations leads to burnout. In 2026, if a man decides to take a lower-paying, less stressful job to prioritize his mental health, the court may label this voluntary underemployment. The potential outcome is that his support obligations remain calculated at his old, higher salary. This is a demographic crisis. Men are being legally forced to stay in high-stress environments to fund a lifestyle they no longer participate in. To navigate this, a man needs a step-by-step career contingency plan before the first legal paper is served. This involves documenting any health issues, industry downturns, or legitimate reasons for a shift in earnings before the litigation lens makes those moves look suspicious. The 2026 landscape requires a level of strategic foresight that borders on corporate planning. You are no longer just a person. In the eyes of the divorce demographic, you are a revenue-generating entity that is being audited for maximum output. But what happens when the audit turns toward your past? We've discussed the digital footprint of your finances and your location. But there is a new, more dangerous demographic shift happening in 2026. The weaponization of social reputation, and the cancel culture mechanics within the family court system. How can a single unverified allegation on a social media platform derail a 10-year custody plan in 48 hours? And as we move into the next part of this masterclass, we have to look at the prenuptial demographic. Why men who never thought they needed a contract are now finding that the lack of one is the single greatest mistake of their lives, and how postnuptial agreements are being used as marriage insurance in the 2026 economy. We are moving from the courtroom into the world of preventive warfare. The shift into preventive warfare brings us to a demographic reality that has reached a tipping point in 2026, the normalization of the contract-based marriage. Historical trends once viewed prenuptial agreements as the exclusive domain of the ultra-wealthy or the Hollywood elite. However, in today's economic climate, we are seeing a massive surge in middle-class men seeking these protections. This is fueled by the realization that in the United States, if you do not write your own rules for marriage, the state has already written a default contract for you, and you likely will not approve of the terms. Imagine a man named Thomas in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thomas is 32 years old, works in mid-level management, and owns a modest townhouse with $150,000 in equity. He is getting married in late 2026. Under the old demographic mindset, Thomas might feel that asking for a prenuptial agreement is a sign of lack of trust. But in the 2026 landscape, Thomas sees his townhouse not just as a home, but as his primary retirement vehicle. If he enters a marriage without a contract and uses marital funds, his salary earned during the marriage, to pay the mortgage, he is effectively commingling his separate asset. Step by step, the court will calculate the Moore-Marsden formula or a similar state-specific equivalent to determine how much of that $150,000 plus future appreciation now belongs to the marital estate. Without a prenuptial agreement, Thomas is essentially gifting half of his premarital hard work to the state's distribution pool. The demographic of the new husband in 2026 is increasingly pragmatic. We are seeing case studies where men are using these agreements not just to protect what they have, but to define what happens with what they will create. This is where the concept of the sunset clause and the lifestyle provision comes into play. Historical trends show that many prenups were rigid, but 2026 agreements are dynamic. They might state that after 10 years of marriage, certain asset protections expire, or they might define specific financial responsibilities during the marriage to prevent the alimony traps we discussed earlier. This is about clarity. By removing the mystery of what if, many men find they can actually focus more on the marriage itself. However, a significant portion of men in 2026 are already married and didn't sign a prenup. This has led to the rise of the postnuptial demographic. This is often triggered by a significant life event, a career change, a large inheritance, or a period of marital instability. Imagine Sarah and James in Ohio. James inherits a family business in 2026. He wants to reinvest in the company, but he knows that if he uses any marital effort or funds to grow it, the business's increased value becomes a marital asset. They decide to draft a postnuptial agreement. This isn't a precursor to divorce. It is a financial reorganization. The potential outcome is a strengthened marriage because the financial elephant in the room has been managed with a legal fence. Step by step, this involves full financial disclosure, which is the number one reason these agreements fail in court. If you hide even a single small investment account, the entire postnuptial agreement can be tossed out as fraudulent. This brings us to the demographic of the disclosure crisis. In 2026, the definition of an asset is broader than ever. We have moved beyond houses and cars into the realm of intellectual property and digital capital. Consider a man who has a significant following on a professional networking site or a specialized blog. In 2026, that influence can be valued. If your professional reputation leads to speaking engagements or book deals, a savvy attorney will argue that the brand was built during the marriage. We are seeing case studies where men are forced to buy out their spouse's interest in their own professional persona. This is why modern agreements are now including clauses specifically regarding personal branding and social media assets. It sounds like science fiction, but for a man in the 2026 creator or gig economy, it is a primary financial risk. Let's look at the step-by-step reality of how these agreements are challenged. The 2026 legal standard often focuses on unconscionability at the time of enforcement. This means even if the agreement was fair when you signed it in 2018, if enforcing it in 2026 would leave one spouse a ward of the state while the other lives in luxury, a judge may strike it down. Men are learning that a prenup is not a set-it-and-forget-it document. It requires maintenance. Demographic data shows that men who update their financial schedules or review their agreements with counsel every 5 years have a much higher rate of successful enforcement. There is also a growing demographic of men dealing with the gray prenup. As we mentioned, divorce among those over 50 is skyrocketing. These men are often on their second or third marriage. They have children from previous relationships and are focused on estate planning. For this demographic, the prenup is less about the spouse and more about the heirs. Without a strictly defined agreement, the 2026 probate and divorce laws can overlap in messy ways. If a man in Florida dies during a divorce proceeding without a prenup, his soon-to-be ex-spouse might still be entitled to an elective share of his estate, effectively cutting his children out of their inheritance. This is the preventive warfare of the 2020s, using family law to protect the legacy of the next generation. But what happens when there is no agreement, and you find yourself in the middle of a silver splitter crisis? We have to examine the demographic of the midlife career pivot. In 2026, many men in their 50s are being pushed out of traditional corporate roles by AI integration and shifting industry needs. If this happens simultaneously with a divorce, the financial math becomes terrifying. The court looks at your last 5 years of high earnings and sets alimony based on that, ignoring the fact that your industry just underwent a permanent contraction. This is where the demographic of the vocational evaluation becomes a man's best friend or his worst enemy. In these cases, the court hires an expert to testify about what you could be earning. Imagine a 55-year-old marketing director whose role was eliminated. The vocational expert might claim that with his experience, he could easily consult for $200,000 a year, even if he hasn't landed a single client. The potential outcome is a support order based on phantom income. Step by step, Men in this demographic must learn how to rebut these evaluations with labor market surveys and proof of diligent job search records. In 2026, your LinkedIn Easy Apply history isn't just for finding work. It's a legal document used to prove your economic reality to a skeptical judge. As we continue this masterclass, we have to look at the most overlooked demographic of all, the debt-heavy divorce. While we focus on assets, the 2026 American male is often carrying significant student loan debt, high-interest credit cards from the inflation spikes of previous years, and buy now pay later obligations that are scattered across dozens of digital platforms. How is this invisible debt divided when the marriage ends? And more importantly, how does the demographic shift in credit identity mean that even if a judge orders your ex-spouse to pay a debt, your credit score is the one that takes the hit when they don't? In the next part, we dive into the credit scars of divorce and the specific step-by-step ways men are rebuilding their financial fingerprints from scratch in a world that doesn't forgive a missed payment. We are moving from the high-level contracts into the gritty day-to-day survival of your financial reputation. The gritty reality of your financial reputation begins with the realization that in the eyes of a lender, your divorce decree is essentially a private contract that does not bind them. This is one of the most dangerous demographic traps for men in 2026. Historical trends show that many men leave the courtroom believing that because a judge ordered their ex-spouse to pay off a joint credit card or a shared auto loan, they are legally shielded from the consequences of a missed payment. However, if your name is on the original loan agreement, the bank still views you as 100% liable. Imagine a man named Christopher in Phoenix, Arizona. As part of his 2026 divorce settlement, his ex-spouse was awarded the family SUV and ordered to make the remaining $15,000 in payments. Christopher, feeling a sense of relief, stops monitoring the account. 3 months later, he applies for a modest apartment near his new job, only to be rejected because his credit score has plummeted 120 points. His ex-spouse missed 2 payments, and the lender reported the delinquency on Christopher's credit file. This is the credit scar of divorce. In a world where your credit score dictates everything from your insurance premiums to your ability to secure a security clearance for work, this is a devastating blow. Step by step, the modern man must execute a total credit decoupling. This starts with a comprehensive credit audit. You need to pull reports from all 3 major bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, to identify every single joint account. In 2026, this is more complex because of the rise of buy now pay later services like Affirm or Klarna, which may not always appear on traditional reports but can still impact your financial standing. Once identified, the goal is to close these accounts or refinance them into individual names before the final decree is signed. If an account cannot be closed, you must place a security freeze on your credit to prevent any new joint debts from being opened without your knowledge. Case studies suggest that men who wait until after the divorce to handle these small details often find themselves tethered to their ex-spouse's financial choices for years. We also have to look at the demographic shift in debt characterization. In many U.S. states, debt incurred during the marriage is considered marital debt, regardless of whose name is on the card. Imagine Brian in Pennsylvania, who discovers during the discovery phase of his 2026 divorce that his spouse has secret credit card debt, totaling $40,000 from high-end retail therapy. Under equitable distribution laws, Brian might be held responsible for half of that debt, even though he never saw the statements and didn't benefit from the purchases. This is why forensic accounting has become a standard tool for men in 2026. It is a step-by-step process of tracing where every dollar went. If you can prove that the debt was incurred for non-marital purposes, such as an extramarital affair or a gambling addiction, the potential outcome is that the court assigns that debt solely to the spouse who created it. This brings us to the demographic of the rent-burdened single father. In 2026, the cost of housing in the U.S. has reached a point where the traditional advice of just get an apartment is no longer feasible for many men. When you factor in child support and alimony, a man's debt-to-income ratio often makes it impossible to qualify for a traditional lease in a safe neighborhood. We are seeing a historical trend where men are forced into co-living situations or moving back in with their parents well into their 40s and 50s. This isn't just a lifestyle change, it's a demographic crisis of stability. Without a stable residence, a man's petition for 50-50 custody becomes significantly harder to defend in court. A judge is less likely to grant equal parenting time if a father is living in a studio apartment with no dedicated space for the children. To combat this, men are now utilizing housing projections as part of their legal strategy. This involves a step-by-step breakdown of your post-divorce budget, presented to the court to show that the proposed support amounts will leave you housing insecure. In some 2026 cases, this has led to a downward deviation in child support, acknowledging that a father's ability to provide a home for his children is just as important as the monthly check he writes to his ex-spouse. It is a move toward a more holistic view of child welfare, but it requires a man to be meticulously organized with his financial data from day one. Let's talk about the tax demographic. Following the 2018 tax changes, the landscape for divorced men became much more punitive. In 2026, we are seeing the long-term effects of the head of household filing status battle. Only one parent can claim the children as dependents for certain tax credits. Historically, this was often conceded to the mother. However, in the 2026 economy, that tax credit can mean the difference between a $2,000 refund and a $3,000 tax bill. Men are now negotiating these tax exemptions as high-value assets. Step by step, you should be looking at alternating years for claiming the children or splitting the exemptions if you have multiple children. If you don't secure this in writing in your 2026 decree, the IRS default rules will likely favor the parent with whom the child spends more than 183 nights a year. Another growing demographic is the student loan trap. Many men in their 30s and 40s are still paying off their own education, or worse, they co-sign for their spouse's graduate degree. In a 2026 divorce, a spouse's degree is often seen as their separate human capital, but the debt used to acquire it might still be classified as marital. Imagine if you spent 5 years helping your spouse through law school, only for the marriage to end just as they start earning a high salary. You are left with the marital debt used for their tuition, while they walk away with the high earning potential of the degree. Case studies in 2026 are increasingly focusing on reimbursement alimony for these scenarios, where the court orders the degree-holding spouse to pay back the other for their contribution to that education. It is a complex, data-heavy argument that requires proving every cent of support you provided during those school years. We also have to address the insurance demographic. In 2026, life insurance is often required by the court to secure alimony and child support payments. If you are the payer, you may be ordered to maintain a $1 million policy with your ex-spouse as the beneficiary. This is an out-of-pocket cost that many men fail to budget for. If your health has declined since you first got married, the cost of a new policy in 2026 could be astronomical. Step by step, you need to verify if your existing employer-provided life insurance satisfies this requirement, or if you need to lock in a private term policy before your medical records become a point of contention in discovery. The 2026 landscape is one of granular financial management. It is no longer enough to split the middle. You have to account for the tax implications of every asset, the credit risks of every debt, and the long-term insurance costs of every obligation. The demographic of the financially literate divorcee is the only one that survives with their future intact. You are rebuilding your financial fingerprint in a world where data is permanent and errors are expensive. But what happens when the financial battle moves from the bank accounts to the physical safety of your children? We have discussed the logistics of custody, but there is a rising demographic of parental alienation, fueled by the 24/7 connectivity of social media and messaging apps. How can a man protect his relationship with his children when the digital whisper is constant? In the next part, we dive into the psychology of the 2026 custody battle, exploring how the demographic shift in modern fatherhood is clashing with legacy legal biases, and the specific step-by-step communication protocols men are using to keep their bond with their kids unbreakable. We are moving from the wallet to the heart of the home. The heart of the home in 2026 is no longer defined by a physical address, but by the digital bandwidth that connects a father to his children. As we move into the psychology of the modern custody battle, we have to address the demographic shift of the digital parent. Historically, when a man moved out, his primary contact with his children was relegated to every other weekend and a midweek dinner. In 2026, the historical trend of physical absence being equated to emotional absence is being challenged by the 24/7 connectivity of the modern world. However, this connectivity is a double-edged sword. For every man who uses FaceTime to read a bedtime story, there is a case study of a father whose relationship is being eroded by the constant, subtle influence of parental alienation through digital channels. Imagine a man named William in Denver, Colorado. William has a 50-50 custody arrangement for his 2 children, ages 8 and 10. Even when the children are at William's house, they are carrying smartphones and tablets that are tethered to their mother's cloud accounts. The demographic reality of 2026 is that the other parent is always in the room. If William's ex-spouse sends a constant stream of messages asking the kids if they are okay, if they've eaten, or telling them how much she misses them and how lonely the house is without them, she is engaging in a modern form of psychological tethering. This creates a sense of guilt in the children that prevents them from fully bonding with William during his parenting time. Step by step, men in 2026 are having to fight this by including specific digital communication protocols in their parenting plans. This is a demographic shift where the legal decree must dictate not just who has the kids on Tuesdays, but the frequency and nature of electronic contact when the children are with the other parent. A well-drafted 2026 agreement might specify a quiet period, where the non-custodial parent agrees not to call or text except in emergencies, or a right of first refusal for video calls. Without these step-by-step boundaries, many men find that their parenting time is being hijacked by a digital ghost, leading to a potential outcome where the children become emotionally distant, even when they are physically present. We also have to look at the demographic of the domestic labor audit. In the 2026 courtroom, the old bias that mothers are the default primary caregivers is still present in the subconscious of many judges, but it is being dismantled by data. Men are increasingly using parenting logs to document their historical and current involvement in the minutiae of their children's lives. Imagine if William kept a detailed, time-stamped record of every doctor's appointment he attended, every school lunch he packed, and every parent-teacher conference he led. In a 2026 custody dispute, this log serves as a forensic rebuttal to the claim that he was merely a secondary parent. The demographic trend is moving toward demonstrated involvement. If you cannot prove the step-by-step reality of your caregiving, the court will rely on historical stereotypes. This brings us to the demographic of the school and extracurricular hub. In the United States in 2026, a child's life is often a whirlwind of specialized coaching, tutoring, and travel sports. Historically, the parent who managed the calendar was seen as the psychological parent. Men are now realizing that they must be the ones listed as the primary contact on the school's portal and the team's messaging app. Case studies show that when a father is the one responding to the missed homework alert or the practice is moved notification, it shifts the demographic perception of his role. You have to be the one in the group chat. If you aren't in the digital loop of the child's community, you are effectively invisible to the people who will eventually be interviewed by a court-appointed guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem, or GAL, represents another significant demographic shift. In 2026, these professionals are more specialized than ever. They aren't just looking at whether there is food in the fridge. They are looking at emotional attunement. They observe how a father interacts with his children during high-stress transitions. A common case study involves the Friday afternoon handoff. Historically, this was a moment of tension. In 2026, men are being coached on parallel parenting techniques to minimize conflict during these transitions. This involves a step-by-step protocol where communication happens exclusively through a court-monitored app like Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents. This demographic shift toward low-conflict transitions is often the deciding factor in whether a man is granted a 50-50 split or relegated to a visitor status. Furthermore, we must address the demographic of the gender-neutral bench. While some jurisdictions remain trapped in the past, many U.S. states have passed laws that create a rebuttable presumption for 50-50 custody. This is a massive win for the demographic of modern fathers, but it comes with a high bar of responsibility. To maintain 50-50 in 2026, a man must demonstrate that he has a stable, child-centric environment. This means that if you are a man living in a high-rise bachelor pad or a home with roommates to save on costs, you are at a demographic disadvantage. The court looks for a nesting capability. Step by step, this means securing a residence that is within the child's current school district and ensuring that each child has their own dedicated space. The financial pressure we discussed in previous parts, the housing lock-in and credit scars, directly impacts this custody battle. If your credit prevents you from getting a 3-bedroom rental, it indirectly prevents you from getting 50-50 custody. It is a systemic loop that men must navigate with extreme precision. Let's look at the psychological assessment demographic. In high-conflict cases in 2026, it is common for both parents to undergo a 730 evaluation or a similar psychological deep dive. This is not just a conversation, it is a battery of tests like the MMPI-3. Historical trends show that men often approach these assessments with a fix-it or defensive mindset, which can be misinterpreted by evaluators as a lack of empathy or a tendency toward impression management. The 2026 demographic of successful fathers in these evaluations is one of vulnerable transparency. Men who can articulate their own emotional journey and their children's specific developmental needs, rather than just listing their ex-spouse's faults, are statistically more likely to receive a favorable recommendation. It is a shift from winning the argument to demonstrating the bond. But what happens when the bond is intentionally sabotaged? The demographic of parental alienation is perhaps the most difficult to prove and the most painful to endure. In 2026, this often manifests as enmeshment, where a child is coached to believe that the father is the source of all the family's financial and emotional problems. Imagine a scenario where a teenage son refuses to see his father because he has been told the father is taking all the money through the divorce. To fight this, men are using reunification therapy, a step-by-step clinical process designed to repair the parent-child relationship. However, the demographic data suggests that by the time a case reaches this point, the damage is often deep. This is why the digital communication protocols we discussed earlier are so vital as a preventive measure. As we move toward the end of this part, we have to recognize that the demographic of the American father in 2026 is one of resilience. You are fighting against historical biases, digital interference, and the economic hurdles of a split household. But the potential outcome is a relationship with your children that is defined by quality and intentionality, rather than just time on a calendar. You are moving from the wallet to the heart, but the bridge between the two is built on data, documentation, and a deep understanding of the legal psychology at play. But there is one final demographic shift that most men never see coming until it is too late. It is the social media discovery trap. How can a single celebratory post on your Instagram, or a comment left on a friend's photo, be used to prove you have undisclosed income or an unstable lifestyle? In the next part, we dive into the digital surveillance aspect of 2026 divorce, where your own likes and follows become the primary evidence used to strip you of your assets and your parenting time. We are looking at the dark side of the digital age. The dark side of the digital age in 2026 is defined by a paradox. We have never been more connected, yet we have never been more vulnerable to the weaponization of our own data. In the context of a high-stakes divorce, your social media presence is no longer a personal scrapbook. It is a live-stream deposition. Historical trends show that men often view their digital life as a separate silo from their legal life. However, in 2026, the barrier between the two has completely dissolved. Digital surveillance in divorce has moved beyond simply looking for pictures of a new partner. It has evolved into a sophisticated analysis of metadata, geolocation, and even the sentiment of your engagement. Imagine a man named Stephen in Charlotte, North Carolina. Stephen is a 40-year-old marketing consultant navigating a complex asset division. On paper, Stephen has reported a significant downturn in his business revenue due to the 2026 economic shift. He is seeking a reduction in temporary support obligations. However, while he tells the court his business is struggling, his Instagram feed tells a different story. He posts a photo of a high-end dinner with a potential client, tagged at a luxury steakhouse. He checks into a premium airport lounge during a business trip. To Stephen, this is branding and networking. To the forensic digital analyst hired by his spouse's attorney, this is evidence of an undisclosed lifestyle and discretionary spending. The step-by-step reality of digital discovery in 2026 is brutal. A legal team will not just look at your profile, they will download your entire data archive from platforms like Meta or X. This archive includes every message you ever sent, every post you liked, and every location where you logged in. If Stephen liked several posts about luxury watches or high-end real estate during the same month, he claimed he couldn't afford his mortgage, the court may view his financial declarations as intentionally misleading. The potential outcome is a finding of bad faith, which can lead to sanctions, the payment of the other party's legal fees, or an unfavorable distribution of the remaining marital assets. This brings us to the demographic of the geotag trap. Most men do not realize that every photo taken on a modern smartphone contains EXIF data, metadata that includes the exact GPS coordinates of where the photo was taken. Imagine if Stephen's ex-spouse claims he is neglecting his weekend parenting time. He even produces a photo of the kids at a park to prove he was with them. However, the metadata on that photo shows it was taken 3 years ago. Or perhaps more dangerously, he claims he is at home in North Carolina, but a background photo posted by a friend shows him at a resort in Mexico. In 2026, the court doesn't need a private investigator when your friend's social media accounts act as a volunteer surveillance network. Step by step, men must implement a digital lockdown the moment a separation is contemplated. This is not about hiding assets, which is illegal and carries severe penalties, but about controlling the narrative of your life. This involves auditing your privacy settings, but more importantly, it involves a third-party audit. You must reach out to friends and family and request that they do not tag you in photos or check-ins. In the 2026 demographic of cancel culture divorce, a single photo of you holding a drink at a wedding can be presented as evidence of alcohol abuse if the other side is pushing for supervised visitation. It sounds extreme, but case studies from across the US show that context is often the first casualty in a courtroom. We also have to examine the demographic shift in professional reputation sabotage. In 2026, LinkedIn is a primary battleground. Imagine a man named Marcus who is a high-level executive in a sensitive industry like defense or finance. During a contentious divorce, his spouse begins liking and commenting on his professional posts with cryptic or disparaging remarks, or worse, sending direct messages to his professional connections. Historical trends suggest this was rare, but in the 2026 interconnected economy, your professional network is a reachable target. This is a demographic shift toward financial scorched earth. If a man loses his job due to tarnished reputation, the marital estate shrinks, but for some, the goal is the destruction of the other party's future, rather than the preservation of current assets. To counter this, men are now including non-disparagement and social media injunctions in their initial filing papers. These are court orders that strictly prohibit both parties from posting anything about the divorce, the other spouse, or the children on any public or private platform. Breaking this order is contempt of court. In the 2026 legal landscape, these orders are becoming as standard as the automatic temporary restraining orders, ATROs, that prevent you from emptying bank accounts. Step by step, you need to ensure your attorney has digital teeth in your initial filings to prevent a social media wildfire from burning down your career. Let's look at the app-based evidence demographic. We've discussed smart homes, but what about dating apps? In 2026, even if you are in a no-fault state, the timing of your entry into the dating market matters. If you create a profile on a premium dating site before the date of legal separation, that profile can be used to argue that marital funds were used for non-marital purposes, specifically, dates, gifts, or travel for a new partner. Case studies show that forensic accountants are now matching credit card transactions to the dates of active status on dating apps. The potential outcome is a reimbursement requirement, where you must pay back the marital estate for every dollar spent on your new social life. Furthermore, we must address the sentiment analysis demographic. In 2026, AI tools are being used by legal firms to analyze years of text messages and emails to establish a pattern of emotional volatility. If you have a history of sending frustrated, late-night texts to your spouse, an AI can aggregate those into a report that portrays you as unstable or aggressive. It takes your worst moments and strips away the years of calm, creating a distorted digital persona. Step by step, the 2026 man must adopt a BIF communication style: brief, informative, firm, and friendly. Every digital communication must be written with the assumption that a judge will read it out loud in court 6 months from now. This leads us to the demographic of the shadow profile. Even if you delete your accounts, the data persists in the accounts of everyone you interacted with. In 2026, deleted does not mean gone. We are seeing a rise in electronic evidence recovery, services that specialize in finding the ghost of a man's digital life. Whether it is a forgotten Slack channel at an old job or a shared family cloud account that you forgot to unlink, the 2026 demographic of divorce is one of absolute digital accountability. The financial and personal cost of these digital mistakes is staggering. We are seeing men lose significant percentages of their net worth because a cloud-synced browser history revealed they were researching how to move money to offshore accounts or cryptocurrency tumblers. In 2026, your curiosity is a liability. The demographic of the informed man is the one who realizes that in a divorce, your phone is a government informant sitting in your pocket. As we conclude this deep dive into the digital surveillance of 2026, we have to look at the next frontier. We have discussed your money, your kids, and your digital footprint. But what happens when the battle moves to the most foundational element of your future? Your estate and legacy. How does a 2026 divorce impact your will, your trusts, and the inheritance you plan for your children? And what is the specific step-by-step post-divorce recovery plan that men are using to rebuild a life that is not just survived, but thriving in the new American demographic? In the next part, we move from the defense of the present to the construction of your new future. We are talking about the rebirth demographic. The rebirth demographic is defined by the shift from high-stakes litigation to the intentional reconstruction of a man's legal and financial legacy. In 2026, the aftermath of a divorce is no longer a period of passive recovery. It is a period of active estate re-engineering. Historical trends suggest that many men wait until years after their decree is finalized to update their foundational documents, but the modern demographic of the informed man recognizes that the day the papers are signed is the day the clock starts ticking on his new estate. If you do not proactively sever the remaining legal ties to your previous life, you are essentially leaving a back door open to your future wealth. Imagine a man named Daniel in Nashville, Tennessee. Daniel has just finalized his divorce in mid-2026. He received a significant portion of his 401k and the title to a rental property. He assumes that because the divorce is over, his ex-spouse no longer has a claim to his world. However, Daniel forgets a critical step-by-step detail: his beneficiary designations. In many U.S. states, a divorce decree might automatically revoke a spouse as a beneficiary on a will, but it often does not automatically override a federal ERISA-governed retirement plan or a private life insurance policy. If Daniel were to pass away in late 2026, his ex-spouse could still legally receive the entirety of his retirement savings regardless of what his new will says. This is a demographic trap that catches thousands of men every year. Step by step, the rebirth process requires a total estate audit. You must go through every single account, from your primary bank accounts to your smallest digital investment apps, and update your transfer on death (TOD) and payable on death (POD) designations. This is the foundation of the rebirth demographic. It is about ensuring that your assets are directed toward your children, your siblings, or your chosen charitable causes, rather than defaulting to a legal ghost from your past. Case studies show that men who spend the first 30 days post-divorce executing these changes are significantly more likely to feel a sense of psychological closure and financial agency. We also have to examine the demographic of the new trust. In 2026, men are increasingly utilizing living trusts to shield their assets from future litigation and to ensure a seamless transition for their children. Imagine if Daniel decides to remarry in 2029. Without a trust, his assets from his first life become commingled with his second life, creating a complex web that will be even harder to untangle if he faces another split. By moving his rebirth assets into a revocable living trust in 2026, Daniel is creating a clear legal boundary. He is telling the world and any future partners exactly what belongs to his children's legacy. Historical trends show that this level of transparency actually leads to more stable future relationships, because the financial expectations are set in stone from day one. The 2026 demographic shift also includes a new approach to health directives and powers of attorney. During a marriage, your spouse is typically your default medical proxy. If you are a single man in 2026 and you are involved in a serious accident, who makes the decisions for you? If you haven't updated your healthcare power of attorney, your ex-spouse might still be the one the hospital calls. Imagine the psychological and legal complexity of having a former partner, with whom you may have had a contentious split, deciding your end-of-life care. Men in the rebirth demographic are now appointing a board of advisors, usually a combination of a trusted sibling, a long-term friend, and a professional fiduciary, to handle these roles. This step-by-step reorganization of your personal safety net is a vital component of post-divorce survival. Let's pivot to the demographic of the financial fingerprint restoration. We talked about credit scars in earlier parts, but the rebirth demographic is focused on the proactive building of a new credit identity. In 2026, this involves more than just paying bills on time. Men are using credit builder accounts and secured lines of credit to aggressively overwrite the negative data from the divorce period. A case study of a man named Anthony in Atlanta shows how this works. Anthony's score dropped to 580 during his 2026 divorce. By opening 3 new, small lines of credit and keeping his utilization under 10%, while simultaneously using a rent reporting service to get credit for his new apartment payments, he was able to return to a 720 score within 18 months. This is a historical trend in 2026. the use of fintech tools to bypass traditional banking delays and accelerate financial recovery. We also have to look at the investment demographic of the single man. Historically, married men tend to have more conservative investment portfolios to balance the needs of a family. Once a man enters the rebirth demographic, his risk tolerance often shifts. In 2026, we are seeing men rebalance their portfolios toward high-growth sectors or specialized real estate as they try to catch up on retirement savings that were halved during the split. However, this is where potential outcomes can turn risky. Step by step, a man needs to work with a fee-only financial planner who understands the specific tax implications of single filing status and the loss of certain marital tax breaks. You are no longer investing for a household of 4. You are investing for a legacy of 1, plus whatever you intend to leave for your heirs. Furthermore, we must address the lifestyle demographic of the reborn man. In 2026, the concept of the bachelor pad has been replaced by the high-functioning sanctuary. Men are investing in homes that are optimized for remote work, health, and high-quality parenting time. This demographic shift is fueled by a desire to prove stability to both the self and the world. Case studies suggest that men who invest in their living environment, focusing on ergonomics, nutrition, and fitness infrastructure, have a much higher rate of professional success in the 5 years following a divorce. You are not just buying furniture, you are building a laboratory for your new life. But what about the social demographic? In 2026, the loneliness epidemic among divorced men is a documented historical trend. To combat this, the rebirth demographic is turning toward interest-based communities and mastermind groups. Men are realizing that they cannot rely on the shared social circles of their marriage. Step by step, this involves a social calendar audit. You have to intentionally schedule activities that build a new independent network. This is not just for emotional support, it is for professional networking. In the 2026 economy, your next big career opportunity is likely to come from a new connection you made while pursuing a hobby or a fitness goal. This brings us to the legacy demographic. For many men, a divorce feels like the end of their story. In 2026, the rebirth mindset reframes it as the midpoint. You are now in a position to define your legacy on your own terms. This might involve setting up a 529 plan for your children that you alone control, ensuring that their education is secured regardless of future family shifts. Or it might involve a charitable remainder trust that provides you with income today while supporting a cause you care about tomorrow. This is the ultimate goal of the masterclass, moving from a place of defense to a place of purposeful creation. But as you begin to thrive, a new set of challenges emerges. You are successful, you are stable, and you are starting to attract new people into your life. How do you protect this new, fragile sanctuary? How do you date in the 2026 demographic of extreme transparency and digital background checks? And perhaps most importantly, what are the specific step-by-step signs that a new relationship is a financial risk rather than a life enhancement? In the next part, we dive into the new relationship demographic, navigating the world of dating, cohabitation, and second time around prenups in the age of data. We are moving from the sanctuary back into the world, but this time, you have the armor of experience. The armor of experience is not just a psychological state. It is a legal and digital framework that you carry into every new interaction in 2026. The new relationship demographic is characterized by a high degree of skepticism and a reliance on data-driven vetting. For the American man who has already navigated the demolition of one household, the prospect of building a second is met with a much more analytical gaze. Historical trends indicate that second and third marriages actually have a higher statistical probability of divorce than first marriages. Therefore, the 2026 approach is not about avoiding love, but about insulating your new sanctuary from the potential outcomes of a future split. Imagine a man named Gregory in Phoenix, Arizona. Gregory is 48, a successful civil engineer, and 2 years post-divorce. He meets someone new and the relationship progresses rapidly. In the old demographic model, Gregory might have moved his new partner into his home within 6 months, commingling their daily lives without a second thought. But in 2026, Gregory is aware of the de facto marriage and alimony laws that have gained traction in various U.S. jurisdictions. He knows that in some states, long-term cohabitation can create legal obligations that mirror those of a legal marriage, even without a wedding ceremony. Step by step, Gregory implements a cohabitation agreement before the moving boxes ever arrive. This document is a critical piece of the 2026 relationship infrastructure. It clearly defines that the residence remains Gregory's separate property, outlines how shared expenses like groceries and utilities will be split, and explicitly states that the arrangement does not create a marital-like financial partnership. This isn't about a lack of romance. It is about providing a clear roadmap for both parties. Case studies show that relationships with these boundaries in place often suffer from less financial stress because the ambiguity of who owes what is eliminated from the start. We also have to examine the demographic of digital vetting. In 2026, a first date often follows a deep dive background check. Men are using public records, professional networking history, and even specialized apps to verify that a new partner's financial and legal history aligns with their own. If a potential partner has a history of multiple high-conflict legal battles or significant undisclosed debt, the 2026 man views this as a high-risk factor. This is a demographic shift where personal safety and financial security are prioritized over the initial spark. It is a protective measure designed to ensure that you are not inviting a Trojan horse into your newly rebuilt life. Let's look at the second time around prenuptial demographic. For men entering a second marriage in 2026, the prenuptial agreement is not a suggestion. It is a mandatory requirement of their estate planning. These agreements are much more sophisticated than those of first-time marriages. They often include bloodline clauses to ensure that assets intended for children from the first marriage remain entirely separate and protected. Imagine if Gregory decides to marry again. His 2026 prenup will likely specify that his retirement accounts, the equity in his current home, and any future inheritances are off-limits for marital distribution. He might even include a life estate provision, where a new spouse can live in the home if he passes away, but the title ultimately transfers to his children. This level of detail is the hallmark of the 2026 demographic. Furthermore, we must address the step-parenting and financial boundaries demographic. In the United States in 2026, blended families are the new norm. However, the financial obligations towards stepchildren can become a legal gray area. Historical trends show that if a man begins providing a significant amount of support for his new spouse's children, he may inadvertently create a loco parentis status, which could lead to claims for support if the second marriage ends. Men in 2026 are countering this by maintaining strict financial separation when it comes to child-related expenses for non-biological children. They might contribute to a joint household fund, but the specific costs of the stepchildren's private school or medical care are often kept as the sole responsibility of the biological parent. This brings us to the lifestyle creep and alimony modification demographic. For a man who is still paying alimony to his first spouse, a new relationship carries a specific legal risk. In many jurisdictions, if a man's lifestyle significantly improves due to a new partner's high income, the first spouse might attempt to block a reduction in support, or even seek an increase based on his newfound household wealth. Conversely, if an ex-spouse begins cohabitating with a new partner, many 2026 decrees include cohabitation clauses that allow the man to petition for the termination of alimony. Step by step, you must monitor the legal definitions of cohabitation in your state, which often include factors like sharing a bank account, holidaying together, or the frequency of overnight stays. Documentation in 2026 is key. Men are using social media archives of the ex-spouse's new life as evidence to trigger these modification clauses. We also need to look at the demographic of the late life startup. Many men in the rebirth stage use their 2026 freedom to launch a new business or pursue a career pivot. When a new relationship enters the picture, the intellectual property of that startup must be protected. Case studies show a rise in intellectual property waivers within cohabitation and prenuptial agreements. This ensures that the sweat equity you put into your new venture during the relationship doesn't become an asset that is appraised and split later on. You are protecting your future self while enjoying your present self. The 2026 landscape for dating and remarriage is one of informed intimacy. It is a world where you can be fully emotionally invested while remaining legally shielded. This demographic doesn't see a contract as an exit strategy. They see it as a foundation for a long-term, stable partnership that respects the history and the future of both individuals. You are navigating the world not as a victim of your past, but as a strategist of your future. As we move toward the final part of this masterclass, we have to look at the ultimate exit strategy, not from a marriage, but from the mindset of the divorced man. How do you move past the label? We have covered the law, the money, the kids, and the digital world. But the final demographic shift is internal. It is the move from divorce recovery to life optimization. What are the specific step-by-step psychological milestones that signal you have finally won the long game? And how does the 2026 man use his experience to mentor the next generation, ensuring the demographic cycle of high-conflict splits is broken for good? In our 10th and final part, we close the loop on the masterclass and look at the legacy of the integrated man. We are finishing where we started, but with a completely different perspective on what it means to be a man in America today. The legacy of the integrated man is the final demographic shift in our deep dive, representing the transition from the survival mindset of a divorcee to the thriving reality of a self-actualized individual. In 2026, we are witnessing a historical trend where men are no longer allowing a legal decree to serve as the period at the end of their life sentence. Instead, they are using it as a semicolon. This is the stage where the technical, financial, and legal structures we have discussed throughout this masterclass merge with a redefined sense of purpose. The integrated man is one who has successfully processed the data of his past to optimize the trajectory of his future, ensuring that his legacy is defined by his resilience and his contributions rather than his marital status. Imagine a man named Jonathan in San Diego. In 2024, Jonathan felt like his identity was being erased. By 2026, he has completed the step-by-step rebuilding of his financial fingerprint, secured his custody arrangement, and insulated his new assets. But the real shift happened when Jonathan stopped viewing himself through the lens of what he lost and started viewing himself as the architect of a new system. He is the integrated man. He has integrated the lessons of his high-conflict split into a new philosophy of extreme personal accountability. This demographic is characterized by a move toward mentorship and community leadership. We are seeing case studies of men who, having survived the 2026 divorce landscape, are now forming peer-to-peer networks to help younger men navigate the potential outcomes of the modern legal system before they even say "I do." Step by step, the integration process requires a final identity audit. This involves stripping away the labels of the courtroom. You are no longer the petitioner or the respondent. You are the founder of your own legacy. Historical trends in 2026 suggest that men who engage in significant contribution-based activities, whether that is volunteer work, community coaching, or professional mentorship, report a 40% higher rate of long-term life satisfaction post-divorce. This is about replacing the void left by the family unit with a wider, more robust social impact. The integrated man understands that his value is not tied to a single relationship, but to his ability to provide value to his community and his children. We must also look at the demographic of the educational legacy. In 2026, fathers are taking a much more active role in the philosophical and practical education of their children. Because the traditional household structure has shifted, the time spent with children is often more intentional. Imagine Jonathan taking his teenage daughter through a step-by-step masterclass on financial literacy, explaining the importance of credit scores and asset protection that he learned the hard way. This is a demographic shift toward intergenerational wisdom. Men are no longer leaving their children's education to the school system alone. They are teaching the real-world survival skills that the 2026 economy demands. By doing so, they are ensuring that their children do not fall into the same demographic traps they did. This leads us to the demographic of the long-term health optimization. Historically, divorced men faced higher risks of cardiovascular issues and social isolation. In 2026, the integrated man treats his health like a high-performance asset. This involves a step-by-step commitment to preventive maintenance. We are seeing men utilizing wearable technology and precision medicine to track their physiological response to stress. Case studies show that men who prioritize physical strength and nutritional clarity during the rebirth stage are significantly more likely to maintain their career peak well into their 60s. This is the 2026 definition of a legacy: being physically and mentally present for your grandchildren and your community long after the dust of the divorce has settled. Furthermore, we must address the philanthropic demographic. As men rebuild their wealth in the 2026 economy, they are increasingly looking at how their assets can survive them. This involves the use of donor-advised funds and private foundations that are disconnected from any marital estate. Imagine Jonathan setting up a small scholarship fund for children from single-parent households. This is the ultimate move of the integrated man. He has taken the pain of his own experience and converted it into a systemic benefit for others. The potential outcome is a legacy that is measured in lives touched rather than dollars divided. It is a historical trend of turning a personal crisis into a public good. Let's talk about the mindset shift from scarcity to abundance. In 2026, the integrated man realizes that the 50% of his assets he may have lost was the price of a second chance. He stops looking at the bank balance of 2020 and starts looking at the compounded growth potential of 2030. This demographic shift is fueled by a refusal to stay in a victim narrative. Step by step, this involves a cognitive reappraisal of the divorce process. Instead of, "I was taken to the cleaners," the integrated man says, "I paid the tuition for a PhD in life management." This change in language is a vital part of the 2026 survival kit. It changes how you show up in meetings, how you date, and how you parent. The 2026 demographic of the integrated man also includes a new approach to conflict resolution. Having been through the adversarial legal system, these men are often the most effective mediators in their professional and personal lives. They have learned the step-by-step value of de-escalation and the high cost of ego. Case studies indicate that divorced men who have integrated their experience are frequently promoted into leadership roles because they possess a level of emotional intelligence and legal awareness that their peers lack. Your experience has made you a more formidable, yet more empathetic leader. As we conclude this 10-part masterclass, we have to recognize that the changing demographics of divorce in America are not just a collection of statistics. They are a call to action. The 2026 landscape is complex, digital, and often unforgiving, but it is also a terrain where a man can build a more authentic and protected life than ever before. You have the data, the legal strategies, and the psychological frameworks to navigate the potential outcomes of this shift. You have moved from the shock of the hook to the deep dive of asset protection, custody psychology, and digital defense. You are now standing at the threshold of your own legacy. But the journey of the integrated man never truly ends. While this masterclass on the mechanics of divorce concludes here, a new question emerges for the modern American male. As you stand in your new sanctuary, fully protected and fully realized, how do you handle the one thing no contract can fully predict? How do you prepare for the sudden wealth, or sudden loss, that the volatile 2027 economy promises to bring? And as the demographic of the solo powerhouse grows, what new social structures are emerging to replace the traditional institutions we once relied on? In our next series, we will be diving into the economy of the individual, how to manage a seven-figure life in a world where the only constant is change. The masterclass is over, but your new life is just getting its first real update. Stay sharp, stay informed, and keep building.